Hi folks, today's video of the review of the new books that I read in 2020. I read 13 books in 2020, which was great. It was one of the few goals that I actually met for the year, but I thought I'd do my yearly review of the books. Now, I did read a number of other books, but they were rereads, so I'm not considering them new to me. So a few of these are a little bit older, but I think actually quite a few of them came out this year or in the last couple of years. So hopefully there are some books in here that might interest you. I started off the year by reading Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. I had started reading this book at the very end of 2019 and finally finished it at the beginning of January. I really enjoyed this book. I have a fondness for fairy tale retellings, and this is sort of a reimagining of kind of Rumpelstiltskin, set in kind of a Eastern European inspired setting. I really enjoyed the setting. I thought it was an interesting take. I don't see a lot of fairy tale retellings kind of set in Eastern Europe type setting. And I enjoyed the characters and the world, and if you're looking for a fun fantasy fairy tale retelling, yay! And this also has the more traditional fae in it instead of cute, adorable things. Fae that you don't want to make contracts with. Started off the year on a good note. Next up, I read Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. I didn't enjoy this book as I think I might have had I not gone in with kind of some misguided expectations. I was expecting more space and more lesbian stuff because I was told it's lesbians in space. That's not quite a good introduction to this book. It's a really interesting world. The necromancy, why am I struggling with that word, in the world and how the magic works is interesting. The sci-fi element I didn't get quite as much. Those were the bits of the book that I wasn't quite sure how exactly the world worked, but it didn't really feel like it got in the way of the plot of this book. Now, it might have been kind of laying the groundwork for future books, which this is the first in a series, and I'm a little on the fence with picking up the next book. I think I might like the next book for reasons that I won't go into because it's spoilery, but I'm guessing on yeah. If you've read the whole book, you might have an idea of why I might be looking forward to the next book, just based on characters. And yeah, so if you've read more in this series, I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comments below. Please try and keep it non-spoilery. But yeah, let me know, should I continue with this series? Does it get better after this one? But I will say, I enjoyed it. It was fun, just not what I was expecting. Next up, I read Wink Poppy Midnight by April Genevieve Taholk. I'm sorry if I butcher any of these authors' names. For some reason, I thought this book was going to have more of a fantasy supernatural element, and that might be because of some of the other books that I've read by this author. But I was pleasantly surprised when it didn't. I really couldn't put this book down. I enjoyed all of the different characters. All of them had very distinct voices. I always could tell which chapters were from who, and it was really interesting, kind of the unraveling of what was going on, what was true, what was maybe misrepresented. Kind of, if you enjoyed E. Lockhart's We Would Be Liars, is that the name of it? I think so. I think that you will really enjoy this. It was a really good book. Couldn't put it down. I tore through it very quickly. Next, I read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. This is the kind of a prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy. And I kind of wish I hadn't read this book. About 2/3 of the way through this book, I really thought about just abandoning it. I didn't really need to know more about Snow and his backstory. I found the relationship between him and Lucy Gray to be gross, and I don't know if it was meant to be gross, but none of the characters were really likable except for Lucy Gray. She was the more interesting character. I would have rather seen her story told more so than Snow's story. Yeah, I think, don't bother with this one. Sorry for the stickers still on it, they won't come off. Next up is a book that I can't believe it took me this long to finally read, and that's A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. I really enjoyed this book. I tried reading this a few years ago and struggled to get past the first chapter or two. I think there's a lot going on. It's a very different world. There's jumping between these different worlds, and it just took me a little bit to get into. So if you're struggling with the first chapter or two, just keep pushing through. I really enjoyed this book. Amazing world building. I loved Lila. Like, she, I think, is my favorite character in this book, but I also found Kel a really compelling main character, very interesting, like, cool to see what was going on, and this is definitely a book that I'm going to continue reading the series. I'm just kind of waiting for the rest to come out in paperback, because I'm one of those people that if I buy a book in paperback, I want the rest of the series in paperback. If I buy it in hardcover, I want the rest in hardcover. Because I just like it that way. Next, I read The Fire Never Goes Out by Noelle Stevenson. I had read most of these illustrations, little comics, on her blog, but as soon as I saw that she had a book coming out with the whole thing in a collection, I knew I wanted to have this. This is such an emotional, honest, open kind of story that's told through it, which is autobiographical. Noelle Stevenson captures so many of these emotions in her illustrations that it just kind of felt like, for me looking at it, I also read this kind of in the middle of when we were on our stay-at-home order, so things were maybe not the brightest looking for me, and it was so helpful to kind of see some of these emotions that I was having, some of these feelings that I have had in the past, kind of brought to life in these illustrations, and seeing her story told through this series of illustrations, and just, yeah, I think this is a collection that is definitely going to stay on our bookshelves. I'm not going to be giving this one away or donating it or anything. And I think I'll probably be coming back to this from time to time when I just kind of need to see some of the illustrations and remind myself I'm not alone. It's okay. The next book I read is A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor by Hank Green. I almost said John Green there. I really enjoyed this book. I have actually read this book twice this year, and it feels so relevant to the world today. I know, even though Hank has commented that he wrote this long before the pandemic, feels like it was written during the pandemic. And I like that in some ways this is definitely a conclusion. It's a continuation of an absolutely remarkable thing, but it tells kind of a different story. This one kind of focuses a lot more, I feel like, on the responsibilities of fame rather than kind of just the exploration of how fame changes somebody. I really liked it. I liked the way the story was told in this book. Yeah, highly recommend. This is definitely towards the top of, not at the top of my list of favorite books that I read this year. Next up is a nonfiction book by Hope Janren, and that's Lab Girl. This is a autobiographical book, and it's told in kind of an interesting way. There are these chapters following her life, and then intermixed with them are these chapters kind of explaining how different plants like grow and different things about plants. She's a geobiologist. Had to check the back there. I found this really interesting. I learned a lot about plants. It also is a fun exploration into like the scientific community, as well as just seeing how one person's enthusiasm for learning and exploration and curiosity, how her journey. I liked it. It was fun, and kind of, it was a nice, I like throwing in a nonfiction book or two in my reads, just kind of as a nice break from fiction and a little bit more grounding, perhaps. Next up is a book that is pretty weird, and that's Mostly Dead Things by Kristen Arnett. This was a book that Ryan picked up, and he was like, I think you might like this. And I did. It's just a bit bizarre. The main character is a taxidermist, and it's a really kind of interesting, bizarre look into like family dynamics and when something causes those family dynamics to change, how people adjust to that, as well as like there's lots of taxidermy stuff in here, which I find kind of interesting. And this was definitely a book that I didn't know hardly anything going into it, and really interesting kind of seeing where things are going. I don't know if I really ever liked any of the characters, but that was okay. I was much more interested in what was going on, what was going to happen, and yeah, a bit of a weird read, but a good read. Next, I jumped back kind of into the fantasy world with Blades of Black by L.L. McKinley. This is a really interesting kind of inspired by Alice in Wonderland, but a whole new world. So it was fun reading a fantasy novel that was set kind of in our world. It kind of, a idea of there's another world that most people aren't aware of, but the main character Alice is aware of that other world, and it's interesting seeing her kind of trying to balance these various struggles of the pressures and struggles and stuff she's dealing with in the real world, along with these supernatural threats that she's trying to take care of as part of her responsibilities in this other I forgot what it was called, but the other world. And yeah, it's the first in a series. I'm definitely planning on reading more into this series, and highly recommend if you're looking for some great fantasy, especially looking to diversify the kinds of writers that you're reading. And the final books that I read in 2020 were the Truly Devious trilogy, Truly Devious, A Vanishing Stare, and A Hand in the Wall. I really, really enjoyed these books. I have read a couple other of Maureen Johnson's books, and this is a fun murder mystery that kind of spans multiple timelines. There's multiple murders across multiple timelines, but they all tie together, and just loved how it all kind of tied together. And I will say each book kind of wrapped up a little bit of the storyline, so that was definitely satisfying that you weren't left on a complete cliffhanger at the end of the first and second book, but it does kind of leave enough of a cliffhanger that you're like, well, I've finished the first book, now I have to read the second book, find out what happens next. I also really enjoyed the use of technology in this. It's set kind of in our world, basically now. Like, there's even a character that became YouTube famous, so cool seeing how technology kind of weaves into some storytelling, and all of that. Hard to put down, very, very readable, and the cast of characters in the trilogy are fairly diverse and very interesting, very different from each other, but it all makes sense, why they're there. Right, so there are the 13 books that I read in 2020 and a few of my thoughts about it. If you've read any of these books, I'd love to know what you thought about them down below, as well as if you read any other great books in 2020 and have some book recommendations. I'm kind of starting to put together my to-be-read list for 2021, and definitely am always looking for more book recommendations, and books that I haven't heard of that, especially if you've liked any of these books and think they're one, and you've read a book that you think I would like, comment. Thanks to all our patrons, especially Tucker. If you like what we do and want to support our channel, head on over to our Patreon page. There you can get access to patron perks and exclusive streaming events. And you can join in on our community discussions. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you give it a like and share it with somebody else who's looking for some book recommendations. Don't forget to subscribe, because we do make videos here every week, usually about tabletop RPGs, but also about our other geeky interests. And you can also go over and back us on Patreon. We just kind of rejigged our Patreon membership, so there are a couple of fun new perks and levels and stuff like that, including, ways that you can kind of keep up to date with us a little bit more, have a little bit more interaction. Otherwise, if you want to just kind of keep up to date, you can follow us on our social media. That's where we post about videos as well as other things that we're up to. All right, I'll see you next time on Roll for Initiative. Bye! Yep. Knew that was happen. Would happen. That's okay. I got a thumbnail. We're good. And it's a low battery. Okay, bye.